Hi everybody, Laura from Silver Threads here. Today we're going to be starting with part 1 of our sock making tutorial. Socks aren't hard, but there are a couple things that you need to know, and if you haven't done them before, there can just be a couple things that can be a little head scratchy. So over the course of 3 weeks, we're going to be covering each of those. This week we're going to be starting with the basics of how to do a sock, which is going to be working in the round. And then we'll be doing it on magic loop and also on double pointed needles. So I've got, looks like a tangle right here, but I'll show you how that works in a second. So we're going to cover both of those and just kind of get you started working in the round, start on the ribbing a little bit, and then next week we'll have another tutorial on how to tackle the next part, which is going to be your heel. But today we're not worrying about that. Today we're just worrying about getting stitches on your needle, getting started in a circle, and going from there. So we're going to be working from the How I Make My Socks pattern by Susan B. Anderson. It is available on Ravelry. She's got it where you can go to her blog and print it off. It's a great pattern. We have some copies here at the shop, and we can either email you a link or, like I said, you can find it through Ravelry, and it's really easy to get to. And that is How I Make My Socks by Susan B. Anderson. She's recommending a sock fingering weight yarn, so we're starting with that. You can use other yarns for socks, but there's a couple things I tend to look for personally when I pick out yarn for socks. I like to pick something that has some nylon in it, so it will have a little bit of durability. If you're going to put all the work into creating these, you want them to last. She also, for her pattern, calls for size 1 double pointed needles. So that's one of the reasons I'm also going to be showing you on double points, because that is what her pattern calls for. But I will also be showing you how to convert that to, if you are doing magic loop, how you would do that while following a pattern written for double points, because it's really easy to switch back and forth between the two. And then from there, let's see, if you do magic loop, you need something that is 29 to 32 inches long. So you do need a circular needle that's long enough to accommodate what we're doing with it. So I've got my stitches started out here, and she asks you for her pattern, she wants you to cast on 64 stitches. So I have 64 stitches cast onto my circular needle here. You're going to want to do a long tail or a German twisted cast on, something with some give to it, something that will have a little bit of stretch. You don't want these stitches super tight because it is going to have to go around your calf. So something that's going to give your ribbing some give and some movement is exactly what you want. To get started knitting in the round, and that's going to be the major part for the top of your sock that may be a new technique if you haven't done it before, is going to be just getting started in the circle. So what I like to do is I like to divide my stitches in half for starting on magic loop. So if we've got 64 stitches total, we're going to have 32. I want 32 on one half and 32 on the other half. And to do that, what I do is I just count out 32. So okay, so that should be 32. Not used to multitasking while I count, so we'll see how that goes. But if you saw there, what I did is I just reached between my 32nd and my 33rd stitch, and I pulled up a loop. And I did it kind of quickly, so I'll also back out and show it to you again. But what you do is I just kind of separated them, revealed the cable there, grabbed it, and just pulled. And that allows me to have half my stitches on one needle. And we're going to pull these up and get the half the stitches on the other needle. And you're going to want to push them up onto your needle tips. And then we're going to join for working in a circle. Okay, there's a couple different ways to join these. One thing that you want to make sure, and this is true whether you're knitting a sock or a hat or anything that's in a circle where you're going to be working around and around and around instead of back and forth, you want to make sure that all your stitches are facing the same direction. So if you look here, you can see that I've got my cast on edge on the inside all the way around. if it was twisted like this or something along those lines, when I went to knit it, it will actually stay in there. So you will end up with a flip in your knitting, and that's great if you want to do that on purpose for like a cowl or something. Not so good if you wanted to actually fit around a body part. So like a hat or a sweater or a sleeve or a sock, any mittens, anything like that. You want this to be straight. All right, so how I like to join it in the round, and like I said, there's a couple different ways to do this. Some people will go ahead and just start knitting, and that will join it. I like to do something a little more secure on my socks, and I just find it gives me a little better join. But you can totally do what is comfortable for you. There is no right or wrong way to do this. But I like to make sure your tail's up and over your back needle, and then you're going to pull this first stitch off the back needle and put it on the front needle, and then take this first stitch on the front needle, and this is where it can get a little bit tricky because you need to pull it over the top of that stitch that you just brought over, keeping that one on the needle, you don't want to drop it, and then put that first stitch from the front needle onto the back needle. So now your first stitch from the back is on the front, and your first stitch from the front is on the back. And that has created a cross, and it has joined you into a circle. All right, now to magic loop, what you're going to do is you're going to pull your back needle out, and this is going to stay the same the whole time. You're going to pull your back needle out, and then you're going to want to double check your pattern and make sure you know what ribbing you're doing. In our pattern, we're doing a knit 2 purl 2 rib. You can also do a 1x1 rib, and I find that's kind of usually what I prefer. So since I'm making these socks for me, I'm going to go ahead and do a 1x1 rib, just because, like I said, that's what I prefer. But you can do a 1x1, you can do a 2x2. You just need to make sure that you've got the right number of stitches to have it come out even at the end. So I'm just going to knit 1, purl 1 across your row, my row real quick here. And usually the first row feels a little bit tight and a little bit slow just because you're working right off your cast on. So apologies for any jitters here, just trying to get over to the end. Okay, so we're getting to the end finally. Split that stitch, try that again. All right, so we're at the end. All right, and because it ends on a purl, that means I know I did my math right and I counted correctly, because if it had ended on a knit stitch, I would have either messed up somewhere in my sequence here, or that means that I actually have 31 stitches on this side and 33 on the other, something like that, something that's not 32 and 32. And in that case, you probably want to double check it, see what happened, and then adjust from there. But if it came out right for you, what you're going to do then in Magic Loop is you're going to turn your needles and point them to the right, push your front needle back in so that both your front needle and back needle have stitches, and you can always tell what your back needle is because your yarn is attached to it. If the yarn is attached to your front needle, something got turned inside out, or something is slipped around the wrong way, you want the yarn in the right back when you get ready to start your next part on the Magic Loop. So we've done half of our row, and now to knit the other half, we're going to pull the back needle out, and we're going to repeat, and we're going to knit across this front part. And I'll just do it really quick and then show you one more time how to pull out, and then we'll go to the double points. So again, I'm doing a knit 1 purl 1 rib. You can do knit 2 purl 2, whatever your heart desires. They're your socks, make them how you want. Again, I picked a yarn. This particular one I'm knitting with is just from my stash. It's a hand-dyed yarn, And again, has some nylon in it because, you know, like I said, if you're going to do all that work, you do want them to hold up. But if you want to knit something like for a bed sock or something just for being cozy and wearing around the house, that becomes a little less critical and your world kind of opens up and you can use any yarn that your heart desires. Let's see. Oops, split the stitch again. Alright, so almost to the end of the row. And this time we'll know we've gone around all the way because I've come upon my tail. And I use my tail as a marker when I'm working in a small circumference like this and doing magic loop. When I hit the tail, I know I've gone around one time because this side didn't have a tail. Alright, so I know I've done one round of ribbing. Alright, so again, we finished this. We're going to turn it, point our needles to the right-hand side. Make sure your yarn is over the back needle. You don't want it underneath it, you want it over it. And you're going to push your front needle in. And then, oop, tail was getting up there too, make sure everything's out of the way. And then pull your back needle out and you're ready to start on the next round. So you'll start on the front half again, work your way around, and all of that. All right, so that's kind of the basics on how to magic loop and get your socks started. Let's see. If you have any more questions about that, you can always call us and let us know. But that's kind of just the basic, really quick how to do it. Now let me pull out the double points and we'll look at those. All right, throw that out of the way. All right, so here's our double points. And like I said, it looks a little bit crazy because I like to cast on onto one double pointed needle just because I find that a little easier to juggle. This particular pattern that we're using from Susan B. Anderson just calls for 4 double points. Typically your packages will come with 5. Some patterns call for 4. You can easily adapt this to use 5 if you prefer, but we're going to go off of what she's recommending just because we're following her pattern. I cast on the same 64 stitches onto just the one needle. And then what you want to do when you're starting with double points is you want to divide the stitches out. And if you'll notice here, I actually have 3 that match and then 1 that doesn't. They're all the same size. That is the one downside to double points is they run away. And so that's why I've got a 1 mismatched needle, but because it's a size 1 and these are size 1s, and they're all wood, I would not mix a metal needle and a wooden needle because they do knit a little differently, but you can mix wooden sizes and that will, or not sizes, but brands rather, and that will be just fine. For the most part, typically 90% of the time. I'm sure once in a while there's going to be an odd one that's not sized exactly the same, but 90% of the time you'll be just fine. All right. So I've got 64 stitches again. So I know I'm going to be doing them on 3. So if I was thinking ahead, I would have done the math. So I think we're going to end up with like 20 stitches and 22 and 22. I think. We'll see how good I am at doing that just off the top of my head. It's not too critical, except you want them mostly even and you want them to have an even number of stitches on them. Because we're doing the ribbing, you want an even number of stitches so that every needle ends with a purl and starts with a knit. It just makes it a little easier to keep track. Okay, so there's our first 20. And then we'll do 22 on this one. Okay, I think that was 22. We'll split that one. Let's see. Okay, and let's see if there's 22. 2, 4, 6, 20, 22. Aha! I think I got it. Wait, no, did I count that right? Anyway, close enough. We won't worry about it too much for the purposes here, but I'll double check it and even it out later when I actually go to work on it. So same thing as with your magic loop. You want to make sure your tail is down, make sure the yarn that you're going to be working with right here is over the back of the back needle. And again, just kind of want to look at this and make sure that nothing's twisty. Right now everything's looking pretty good. All my cast on is to the inside, and so I'm going to, and actually on these, so this is where I'm going to show you that other technique that I was talking about, where I'm not going to actually flip my stitches over. I'm just going to start knitting with them. So I'm going to pick up my extra double point because you've got it cast on 3, so you need your 4th one for actually knitting with. And so to do that, this is kind of tricky. This feels like chopsticks. It gets easier with practice and is not as messy as chopsticks. So you just kind of want to, I usually end up putting my hand kind of in the middle. Everybody holds them a little different. Everybody navigates it a little differently. Just find what feels comfortable for you and you'll be fine. But you want to go into this first stitch on your front needle. It was the stitch that you first cast on. And then we're going to grab the tail, or not the tail, but the working yarn, and use it to knit this first stitch off of that front needle. And that just joined us in the round. Like I said, a little bit tricky and a little bit pokey, and you want to make sure that your stitches all kind of stay in the center of your needles so that they don't run off anywhere. I'm not obviously applying to the one you're actually knitting off of, but the other ones you want to make sure. And then just kind of maneuver your way around. Once you're joined in a circle, it's harder to twist it. I won't say it's impossible, because we have had some people who through unfortunate accidents have ended up twisting their yarn on their cast on their first row, but it is pretty hard to do. And so usually by the time you get it joined in a circle, you should be good to go, and you shouldn't have to worry about twisting it. So we're just going to work around real quick. All right, so we've reached the end of this double point. Okay, this one falls away. Got the stitches I just knit on this first one that I was just working with, and you're just going to rotate it a little bit. All right, and that brings in your old stitches are here that you just finished working. New stitches that you need to work are here. And again, pick up your extra double point. Make sure your yarn is over the top of the needle, not underneath it. That's one of the benefits of starting it with your first stitch here being a knit stitch. It makes it a lot easier to remember to have your yarn in the back. And then just start knitting and purling. You do want to, and I didn't tell you this on the magic loop either, but you do, I forgot, but you do want to, when you switch from one needle to another, and same thing on the magic loop, when you switch from cape one front half to back half, you want to knit the first 2 to 3 stitches at a slightly tighter tension than you do the rest of your knitting. The reason for that is there's extra tension on these stitches here on your edges, and they can have a tendency to kind of pull apart a little bit and end up with something that we call laddering. And laddering is when you can see the knits, and you can see the space between your stitches, and it will show up in your knitting as kind of like a funny line of like almost a gap in between your stitching, and you can see it. And so you want to avoid that. You want to knit your first couple stitches just a little bit more tightly than you do the rest of your work. All right, so here again I'm at my edge or my corner. I'm turning. Got my older stitches here, my new ones coming up here. Got my extra double point that just fell out of these stitches. And we're just going to start knitting and purling them. Okay, and here's where these are trying to slide off. So remember how I said to try to keep them in the middle of your needle? I'm bad at remembering to do that too. It's kind of a constant, oh no moment. But I caught them before they got away. So you just want to slide them to the middle. And if you find you're having a lot of trouble with that, wooden needles can help just because they're a little more grippy. So you have more time before there's a crisis. And all your stitches are gone. Let's see. Okay, so we're coming up. I know I've gone around one time now. And I know that because here's my tail. Okay, so I've gone around one time. There is a little bit of gapping here. Not too surprising because of how I joined it. Again, like I said, that's why I like to usually switch your two stitches over the top of each other, like I showed you on the magic loop. But it should cinch up as I keep going because I'm going to knit these next stitches a little more tightly. And then I also have my tail that I can use to cinch up any additional gap that I might still have when I reach the end of my sock. Okay, so that is pretty much it. And with double point, same thing. You're just gonna always keep working in a circle. Make sure that your yarn you're working with is always on the back right-hand side, and you're good. If it's over here, something's not right. If it's over here, something's not right. So you always want it on the back right-hand side of your needle, and that's how you know where to start next. All right, and so that's it for those. She has you knit 15 or 16 rounds of rib on her sock here, on her pattern. I usually do about 1.5 inches of ribbing. You can either go off of a certain number of rows, or you could just use a measuring tape. You can make them as long or as short as you want. She also is going to have us do, after the ribbing, going to have us do some stockinette for 6 inches, and then we'll be on to the heel. So over the next week, I'm going to work on ribbing both my socks, and then I'm going to work on doing about 6 inches of stockinette. And you can make that longer or shorter according to the preference of how long you like your socks. That's just kind of what she's recommending. And then next week we'll come in and we'll get ready to do the heel. So if you have any questions, give us a call and let us know. Our number is 828-349-0515. Otherwise, happy sock knitting, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks everybody, have a great day.